Welcome, and thanks for joining us today for this special event. We have moved into the 6th year of the Voices from the Holy Land film series, but of course with the current situation with coronavirus, et cetera, we've had to kind of change the format that we've done in the past. And so we're kind of transitioning over to what we're calling a salon format, where we'll be having the opportunity to view a film, and we'll be having a discussion amongst some key people, as well as Q&A from the participants. So we're really happy to have you here with us. Today we'll be discussing the 4-part series from Just Vision called Homefront, Portraits from Sheikh Jarrah. And I hope you all had the opportunity to view all 4 of the short documentaries that feature various Palestinian and Israeli voices. Those 4 films, some short films, are on the justvision.org website, available for viewing. And if you haven't had a chance, I hope you do that when we finish here to complement your understanding and discussion points that are raised throughout the event today. Before we introduce our moderator, I want to ask Maryn Goodson, who is a member of our organizing committee, to talk briefly about the Voices from the Holy Land series. Maryn?
Thank you, Tom. As Tom mentioned, I serve on VFHL's organizing committee. I represent a local UCC church as well as UCC's Central Atlantic Palestine Israel Network. My assignment is to offer background on Voices from the Holy Land, to describe what we've done thus far, and to talk about future ideas and hopes. Remember Operation Protective Edge, the 2014 military operation launched by Israel against Gaza? That operation resulted in over 2,000 Gazans killed, over 10,000 wounded, 7,000 homes destroyed, 90,000 more damaged. Voices from the Holy Land began in response to that aggression and to U.S. mainstream media's reporting on it, reporting with no reference at all to the Palestinian perspective. VFHL organizers chose a film-based strategy to allow Americans to see and hear realities from that Palestinian perspective. This led to the 2015 film series at Grace Presbyterian Church in Springfield, Virginia, with 3 co-sponsors and 10 supporting faith organizations. Remember those numbers. Since that first series, a cohesive sense of mission has emerged. As a faith-based initiative, we strive to raise awareness and educate the American public about issues related to justice, human rights, and peace in the Holy Land without political bias. We present the other side, not accessible through mainstream media, by offering curated documentary films as catalysts for discussion, engagement, and action. We continue to offer an annual DC Metro series, unless a virus intervenes. Additionally, we have begun a film partnering program with local churches. We've supported spin-off series in nearby cities in Maryland and Virginia, plus events with specific faith groups like Friends and Islamic Centers. We have active partnership spin-offs in Richmond, St. Louis, and Boston. Our coalition now numbers over 100 interfaith organizations. We have presented approximately 150 film events, reaching an estimated 8,500 people. Looking ahead, in 2020 and 2021, we hope to organize more spin-off series in other cities and regions, expand congregation-based film screenings and discussions, expand the virtual library of films, update social media platforms, launch featured film facility on the website, launch monthly online film screening and discussions, our own online salon. We hope to explore options for joint events with Palestinian organizations and individuals. We need your help, your ideas for collaborative opportunities and ways to expand our outreach. More on that after discussion of today's presentation. Check the chat box for email addresses and social media links so that you can be in touch.
Thank you, Maryn. We want to give kudos and thanks to the organizers in the various other communities around the nation that are now part of our Voices from the Holy Land series. So Nancy Wein is here from, hi Nancy, from
Hi.
She leads Richmonders for Peace in Israel and Palestine. They're the organizers of the series there. Nancy, go ahead.
Hi. Hello. I see a lot of RPIP folks out there. Just to introduce very quickly, we are a local group called Richmonders for Peace in Israel, Palestine, known as RPIP. And we work in conjunction with another local group, the Arab American Association of Central Virginia. Everything we do with them, and we have been involved in, we've been around since about 2014, and then we joined with the Arab American group, and then starting in 2000, and we were already a group that was engaged in primarily educational work in Richmond, Virginia. There was a great need for more understanding of the situation in Palestine, and I think we've really grown in our numbers and in our outreach, mostly working with churches, mosques, and so on, to show films and to have speakers as well. And back in 2019, a long time ago, last year, Deepak contacted us, and we had our first Voices from the Holy Land series in 2019, which consisted of 5 films at various churches, and even I see Annette Khan down there at one of our local Muslim school, which Annette was the head of that school at that time. She's since retired. And then this year we started again. We had a very successful start in 2020. We had 5 films planned. We showed 2, and I think we got good response from those films. We love working with Deepak and Voices from the Holy Land. I think it helps us to organize ourselves and present a series of films, and one film then leads to another, and we grow our group. We also have speakers, and we were about to actually, I've been in conversations with Miko about coming to Richmond in November. I think that's kind of on hold for now because we don't know what's going to happen, but nice to see you out there. But anyway, I think that's about what I wanted to say about us. We really thank Deepak for all the work he's done, and we're hoping that we can be part of the virtual series that's coming up. Hopefully we will be a part of it, and we will continue to do our work in educating our community. And now through this new platform, we can educate people all over the US. So there is a bright side to, I guess, our current situation. But thank you. Thank you.
Thank you, Nancy. And Lee Keister is here from the St. Louis Friends of Bethlehem. Lee's got a great group organized down there. And Lee, do you have a few words to say?
Well, yes, I guess very few words to say. We're a very new group. We just started up, I guess, 1.5 years ago. And last year was the first year that we participated with Voices from the Holy Land for the film series. We showed 5 films, and we were well on our way for this year's. We had 3 films lined up in venues and co-sponsors, and then we got chopped off at the knees. So we are hoping to be able to do something online or do whatever we can do. One of our largest co-sponsors had told us that they would start again in October having gatherings, but then after Dr. Fauci's comments last week, they said, well, we're just going to play it by ear. So who knows what's going to happen this fall. St. Louis has had some cases, probably not as many as, I'm sure not as many as on the East Coast, but we've had our share. Illinois has had a big share of COVID cases. I don't know what else I can say. I see some of our members here on this chat.
Great, great. Oh,
Yeah,
good.
Bob Saberi's one, Louise and
Yeah.
Angela and
Great.
Terry.
Yeah. Glad to have all of you on board. I have some St. Louis roots myself, but
Ah,
from the Illinois side. So
okay.
been
What,
anxious to see how you guys are doing down there.
yeah,
And
what,
also, let me introduce Laura Dufour. Laura's a graduate student at the Boston University School of Theology, and they got a great series started up this year, only to have to cancel here as things got worse. Laura?
Actually a recent graduate at Boston University School of Theology. I had planned this film series for my last semester, this past spring semester, with the help of Joe and Deepak. Cut short, we only showed 2 out of the 4 movies, but we had pretty decent turnout at 2. It was a very different setting. It was a church setting, but it was a Christian seminary, so our hope was to bring these kinds of issues with the focus, with more of the, like we picked the videos that were more Christian based, talked more about to really start getting this conversation going at a school that is already very much focused on social justice issues. So unfortunately, like I said, I just graduated. I don't know if anybody's going to be yeah, so you know what else to say, but our hope was for it to keep going into years, but I don't know if that's going to happen now.
Yeah. Great. It did break up a little bit there. I see Joe on too. Joe, did you want to add something?
Yeah, thank you, Laura. Not much really to add. It was some exciting partnerships we were able to form with the screenings we did have. The first one was the People in the Olive, and we were able to partner with the Faith and Ecological Justice Program. So we're just hoping that, like Laura said, we're not sure about the status of the group, but I think we were able to get students talking about the issue, especially people who care about other forms of social justice and being able to link it with Palestine. So not sure the status of the group or the status of future screenings, but I think people are talking about this issue more on campus and having professors assign Palestinian liberation theology. So fingers crossed that this will be something that will continue with future students.
Great, great. Yeah, so if anyone else on the call today has some connections in the Boston area that can assist in keeping that series going, we'd love to have the opportunity to put everybody in touch with each other. And the entire Voices from the Holy Land Working Group, amongst many of the people here today, want to thank all 3 of you folks for your effort to increase awareness and work to overcome the struggles in the Holy Land. So with that bit of background, I'm pleased to introduce Miko Peled. Miko's an Israeli-American known to many of us already, and a very dedicated human rights activist focused on the oppression of Palestinians. Miko served in Israel's Special Forces after high school, but realized that he couldn't continue to serve in the military, especially, I think, at the time of the invasion in Lebanon. So he's authored a number of important books that are recommended reading for everybody. I think many of you have read them already, but if not, please check that out. You can see more about the books on his website, mikopeled.com. And we have a reference to a paper that Miko would like us to send around, which I'll post again in the chat section a little bit later on. I put it up once, and I don't know if you can access it now, but I'll put it up again a little bit later on in the presentation. So with that brief introduction, Miko, please give us your opening remarks, and then we'll go into questions and answers after that.
Sure. Well, thank you, Tom and Deepak and everybody for putting this together. This is my second round of hosting one of these or being part of one of these. And I have to say, I think this is invaluable because there's so many documentaries that are being put out there about Palestine, and nobody has the time to look at all of them. Nobody has the time. But when you have an event like this, it focuses everybody's attention on a particular one that I think perhaps many of us wouldn't have taken the time to watch or discuss. The last one I was involved in was 1948, Creation and Catastrophe. And if you haven't seen that, I recommend it. And this one too, I mean, this is very short. This is four short segments about the neighborhood of Sheikh Jarrah. And they're well done. They're, you know, it's easy to watch. It's very quick, and it really gets the point across. So if you haven't watched it, I suggest you do it. I recommend it. And if you have, send it around because it's very easy to see. And I think it touches on some really good points. I put in a link, the link that Tom talked about. I posted it earlier on in the chat, because Iramim, which is an organization, a good organization that deals with issues that have to do particularly with Jerusalem, analyzes the situation there. There's a map, you know, so it really shows all the issues kind of that have to do with Sheikh Jarrah. But I was there many times. I mean, when when the protests began, I was there many times as part of those protests. I've seen what goes on there. I have the neighborhood of Sheikh Jarrah, like Tom was saying, it's around the corner from St. George's, and the neighborhood itself is a very important Palestinian neighborhood. Some really important landmarks. The American Colony Hotel, if you've, you know, the Sheikh Jarrah Mosque is right there. The Hind al-Husseini Women's College is right up the street. Around the corner is the Dar al-Tifl al-Arabi, which is a school, an orphanage that was created by Hind al-Husseini after the massacre of Dir Yassin, and became a very important school, very important education institution and orphanage. Over the years, it's still functioning, it's still a school. And that's right around the corner. The Orient House, which is a beautiful, beautiful mansion that belongs to the Husseini family. There's a lot of controversy, a lot of issues relating to activities there and so forth. The Israeli authorities closed it. But so it's a very, very important neighborhood, Arabic neighborhood, Palestinian neighborhood. And I actually took classes there in Arabic at the Hind al-Husseini Women's College, because Al-Quds University, which is in Abu Dis, and they're not allowed to have a presence on the other side of the wall, on the Jerusalem side of the wall, because it's called Al-Quds, which means Jerusalem, use the facility at Hind al-Husseini to teach Arabic for Arabic courses, and I took Arabic classes there for several years. So I used to go there all the time, and two of the professors that I had over the years live in the neighborhood, and their houses, or their home is one of the homes that's slated to be taken. And they don't know if somebody's going to knock on the door, you know, tomorrow morning or tonight and kick them out, even though they've been living there for a very long time. So, like I said, it's a beautiful neighborhood. It's a beautiful part of Jerusalem. A lot of important landmarks. But it's been slated as part of a larger plan to Judaize parts of East Jerusalem and push out Palestinians. And in the link that I sent, it really details well the larger plan. And one of the tools that they've been using is looking at areas where Jews resided pre-1948. So there are a few properties there in Sheikh Jarrah. There are some in Silwan, which is on the other side of the city, you know, the other side of the old city, and so forth. And they come and they say, well, Jews lived here, so that means it's ours. They go to court. And these are organizations, you know, very rabid settler organizations that are dedicated to this. They're very, very well funded, and they're dedicated to getting rid of as many Palestinians as possible. And we're just talking about Jerusalem now, so as to create kind of a more Jewish East Jerusalem, and that's it. And this has been going on for a very long time, for years now. Settlers come in, and it's really not like, you know, the owners of the home want to come back and are asking for their homes back. These are settler organizations that want to kick the Palestinians out. They do it in the most brutal fashion, and you can see this in the movie. And they just use the houses for, you know, whatever activities they have. It's not like there's a, you know, a family living there and so forth. And they're gradually taking over that community, which, like I said, a beautiful neighborhood. And by the way, many of the foreign consulates in Jerusalem are in that neighborhood. And they've turned it into a very stressful and dangerous, unsafe place to walk around. Like I said, I've been to many protests there over the years, and then they kind of quieted down. There were no protests for a while, and they started again. And I remember one year I was there, and there were people with signs saying, "Mike Huckabee, go home." And I thought, Mike Huckabee, go home? Well, what's Mike Huckabee got to do with any of this? This was before his first run for the presidency, and he was there with the settlers to support the settlers. He actually was there to support the settlers, and some people, of course, knew that he was there. I thought, Mike Huckabee, what the hell is he doing here? But it was part of his Holy Land tour. He was standing with settlers. He was at Sheikh Jarrah. He was in other places. He was, you know, looking at the footsteps of Moses and Jacob and Abraham and so forth as part of his campaign. But it's a fierce battle. It's been a fierce battle for a very long time. When we see what is being done to these Palestinian families, of course, it's heart-wrenching. But I think we have to be fair, we have to put this in a larger context. There's nothing unique about what is happening in Sheikh Jarrah, except that it is in Jerusalem and it's slightly more visible. But all of Palestine has been subjected to this brutality, to this cruelty for the better part of the last 100 years. I mean, the Zionists began kicking out Palestinian farmers and Palestinian peasants and Palestinians from their homes, you know, long before the state of Israel was established. And today, when we look at the Nakab, you know, the entire southern part of Palestine, which is the Nakab, when we look at what is happening to Palestinian Bedouins, it's horrifying. It's absolutely horrifying. You know, these little encampments being destroyed. They're not allowed to build a tent. They're not allowed to, never mind, build a home. We see the same thing in the north. We see the same thing in the Triangle area. And we're talking about areas where these are Israeli citizens. These Palestinians are Israeli citizens. We see it everywhere. And like I said, this has been the reality in Palestine for the better part of 100 years. Hebron comes to mind as well. If you've been paying attention, they're expanding the access now. The excuses, they're expanding the access to the Jewish part of the Ibrahimi Mosque, and they're taking away Palestinian land and taking away more Palestinian areas. And really what they want to do is build a neighborhood, another settlement or Jewish neighborhood in the old city of Hebron. And by the way, Sheikh Jarrah, the same thing. And the plan is to build a couple of big settlements there in that area, of course, for Jews only, and to get rid of all these beautiful Palestinian homes. And again, create another settlement to Judaize or to strengthen the Jewish presence, as they say, in East Jerusalem. And by the way, Silwan is another area where some terrible things are happening. Very, very similar. They also found some area there where a couple hundred years ago, Jews from Yemen came and lived there for a while and so forth, and then now they came and they took it and the settlers are there. So this is happening everywhere. One of the issues that they raise is, or one of the excuses I should say that they give is, well, you know, Jews lived there pre-1948. There's even a scene where one of the Palestinian women is out there, you know, very angry, and some settlers are walking around, and the settler says to her, "Were you here before 48? Were you here before 48?" And I felt like saying, well, were you here before 48? I mean, you know, this claim that somehow Jews have a right because they were always there is, of course, not true. The Zionists claim that they have a right because they haven't been there for 2,000 years. You know what I mean? But what about the people who have been there for 2,000 years? And if you want to go back to 1948 and bring justice, well, fine. I'm sure the Palestinians would be very happy to open that Pandora's box and allow everybody to go back to where they were before 1948. I'm sure the Palestinian, 5 million refugees who are languishing in refugee camps would be happy to come back immediately and redress and take, and go back to where we were. I mean, this is exactly what the right of return is all about. But that's not what they're doing. They're only willing to do this for Jewish people. And this really brings us back to the ridiculous claim that Jews have a right, the Jews are returning to the Holy Land. Because if we're talking about return, then the first people in line to return should be the people who were kicked out most recently, which are the Palestinians. I always say, you're not going to find any Jewish person who can actually trace their family's roots to Palestine, to Judea, to the ancient Hebrews. You ask Israeli kids, where's your family from? They'll say Poland or Russia or Ukraine or Morocco or Iraq. You ask a Palestinian kid here in America, where's your family from? They'll say Jaffa, Haifa, Akka, Jerusalem, Nakab, Askelan. I mean, they know this is the reality. So if we're going to go back and bring everybody back to pre-1948, I'm sure the Palestinians will be very, very happy to do that. There's no question about that. But it's got to be across the board, and of course, it's got to be for everyone. But that's not the intent. This is kind of this is the reality that the Zionists have created, where only they have a right to determine who has rights. There are two things that I want to bring up from the movie itself. The protests began and were really came to light as a result of some Israeli activists working with the Palestinians. And it's been kind of a thing that Jerusalemite people do Friday afternoon for a while there. Everybody would go to Sheikh Jarrah to protest, and there were clashes with the military, people got arrested and so forth. And one of the women that's featured in the film, one of the parts there is with a woman who immigrated from America, and she's lived there for a long time, and like she said, I'm a law-abiding citizen, I pay my taxes, blah blah blah. And then she discovered Sheikh Jarrah and she started going, and she was very upset by what she saw. And to me, I suppose better late than never, but my thing is, how do you go to live in that country and not be aware of what's going on? I mean, how could you go there to begin with and not be aware, and then live there all these years, and suddenly the light bulb goes off and goes, oh yeah, there's a problem in this one neighborhood in Jerusalem. I don't understand that. It's not like they're living in a cave. There's social media, there's the news, everybody knows what's going on. And Sheikh Jarrah, like I said, is one small example of what is happening over Palestine every day, all the time. Never mind, let's say you haven't heard of the history. You haven't heard of the Nakba, of the catastrophe that began in 1948. Let's say you haven't heard of Deir Yassin massacre and all the other massacres, but you're living there now for a decade, 2 decades, and you don't know. You suddenly realize that there was Sheikh Jarrah. And the problem that raises, besides this, and I don't mean to sound cruel, because good for her for going and doing what she's doing, but there's a little bit of a willful ignorance here on the part of kind of liberal Israelis. They spend a lot of time putting out little fires. And as all the activists are in Sheikh Jarrah, the settlers are, they're dancing around fires all over the place. In Hebron, around Bethlehem, in the Etzion area, in the northern West Bank, all these other places, all these towns and villages that are being constantly harassed by settlers. And again, not only in the West Bank, in the Nakab. There's this terribly criminal organization, which is a settler organization that was founded by Bezalel Smotrich, who is now, until now, he was the transportation minister. It's called the Tnuat Regavim. You should check them out, Regavim, and they perpetuate this narrative that Arabs are taking over our lands, that Arabs are taking over our water, and we need to save our land and save our water. And they do terrible things, both in the West Bank, but in the Nakab and in other places. But that's the narrative. And so how can you sit there and just pretend that Sheikh Jarrah is the only problem? I think it's really, really important. And in a way, I think Israelis try to avoid the conversation of the larger issue, the larger picture. The problem is systemic. The problem is not only Sheikh Jarrah or only Hebron, or only this or that or the other. There's a problem there's been a plague in Palestine for 100 years, and we need to stop it. And the only way to stop it is to, I think, operate in a systemic way. And one other comment is the older grandmother, the Palestinian grandmother, her family was just kicked out of their home and they're living with her. You see the young boy. And so now I think he says 11, 12, 13 family members are living with the grandmother because the settlers just took over their home and it's right next door. And she looks and she says, I don't trust them. I don't trust them. You want to tell me that they're going to leave their people, leave their turn their back on their people and be with us? I don't trust them. I don't believe it. And that's a very moving moment. It's very honest and it's very moving. And I think you got to respect that. I mean, why should she? Everything she's seen, since she was a child, I should say there's nothing she's seen since she was a child that would allow her or give her any reason to trust these Jews, to trust these Israelis. And of course she doesn't. It was very honest. It was a very honest moment. And I know many Palestinians who think it, but perhaps wouldn't say it because it's not polite publicly or to others. And she says it outright. She goes, well, I don't know why I should trust them. I also know many Palestinians who do say it, and I think it's important for them to say it because it's important for people to know that there's no reason for Palestinians to trust. Even those of us who are, in it with them and working hard, takes a long time to build the trust. And there's a moment there that we haven't quite reached, I believe. I'll end with just one more comment. I think, like I said earlier, I think these little events like this, showing these films have been fantastic. I think they're invaluable, and I wish more people see this. And of course, I know you're recording. Hopefully, we'll be able to post it and share it so other people can, and that'll encourage people to watch the film. And it's great to see everybody here from different groups, different coalitions around the country doing so much. I want to invite everybody to think about one thing though, as we do all this. People talk about Israel-Palestine a lot, and or about the occupation, and I think that's a problem. I think that's problematic. The occupation deals with a small part of Palestine. When we say occupation, we're limiting it to the West Bank and Gaza or East Jerusalem. When we say Israel-Palestine, I don't know what that means. It pretends like there's a part of a country that's Israel and a part that's Palestine, or I don't know what that means. For several thousand years, until exactly 72 years ago this month, or yesterday, I should say, this country was Palestine. And from that moment on, May 15th, 1948, it was Israel, and everybody's, and it's all Israel, or it's all Palestine. So I always invite people to say, well, to look back at our values and say, well, what do we want to legitimize here? Because we can't hide the fact that Israel and Palestine negate each other. It can't be both. It cannot be both. If we accept Israel, we legitimize Israel, we use the name Israel, then that comes with a whole package. And Sheikh Jarrah is one small example of that package. But the last 100 years demonstrates what that package is. And we heard here about the Gaza massacres and so forth. So, I mean, that's what Israel is. There's no other Israel. Never has been. So if we hold on to the name Israel, even if we hyphenate and say Israel-Palestine, we're still legitimizing and saying, this is okay, maybe not on all of it, but on part of it, which of course is not realistic. But we say okay to that. But if we don't agree with that, if our values point us in the direction of justice and peace, we have to realize that Zionism and Israel are incompatible with justice and peace. And it's not an easy thing to say, and it's not an easy thing to even accept and think. And you can believe me, I know, because I come from, that's my background. Zionism was something that was fed, with my mother's milk. But I think it's important to make that clear. There's not going to be peace unless there's justice. And of course, Israel is incompatible with that. So as we talk about it, as we think about it, as we share our ideas, as we share events with other people, I like to invite people to think in that direction and check with their own values and use whatever represents their values as the name for the country. I, of course, came down on the side of Palestine. So that's what I choose to call it. And I think that's the right thing to do. And that's really it. I mean, I think going and looking at every little aspect of this bigger issue, of this big issue, is important, which is why I think these movies are great, because they raise different aspects, and in the end we get a sense that there's a whole here. But it's really, really important at the same time to always remember, while we're talking about Sheikh Jarrah and we're talking about a particular neighborhood, a very important, by the way, important culturally, important historically to Jerusalem. It's a very rich neighborhood. It's also important to not forget that the problem is systemic. It's not only Sheikh Jarrah, and we're not going to be able to solve just Sheikh Jarrah. Excuse me. And that's it. So I'll stop there, and I'm happy to open this conversation. Thank you.
Great. Thank you, Miko. We're going to open up to Q&A, and in fact, Bob's already got a question in for us. With this many participants on the line, I don't think it works very well for me to just unmute everybody and start talking. So if you'd raise your hand, or if you'd use either the thumbs up or the clap, I don't care, one of those symbols at the bottom for responses, I'll know that you're anxious. And if I don't call on you, wave your arms, I'll catch you sooner or later. But let me just start off with one quickie, and then we'll get to Bob's question. Miko, I know that you've been involved in the past with training Palestinian kids in karate and stuff like that. And we saw Muhammad in the first film here when his grandmother noted that he's a man older than his age. And I'm just wondering what you found and learned and saw in your work with younger people in Palestine and their ability to deal in this environment.
I think the comment that she made, I agree with you, was an excellent comment, and it's very, very true. Palestinian children grow up very fast because they have to. I mean, the reality they see around them, regardless of where they live, regardless where in Palestine where they live, whether it's in the north, in the Galilee, in the Triangle area, in Jaffa, of course, Jerusalem is the kids grow up incredibly fast because they're under so much pressure. In the neck of desert, of course, the West Bank, Hebron, you name it. So they do grow up, they have to grow up very, very fast, and they're resilient. They're very resilient. I'll tell you, I'll share a little story. It's in my book, it's in the General Sun. I was there, this is, my previous career, I taught martial arts for many, many years. I don't do it anymore, but I taught martial arts, and it's a great job. I mean, I loved it, every minute of it. And I taught many, many children. And I had Palestinian friends who had karate schools. So I would come when I was in Palestine, I'd visit them, and we would teach together. We would do things together. I would come and teach at a community center. I taught at the Haisha refugee camp there. I taught in Ramallah and so on. And one year I was there in the summer, and it was Ramadan. And it was really, really hot. And but life goes on, even though if it's Ramadan, life goes on. Everybody goes to work, everybody works out, and we were in this karate studio, beautiful karate studio, Ramallah, and packed with kids and packed with adults, and the parents are sitting in the back, and it's hot as God knows what, and we're all working out and sweating. And I was there with my son, my second son, Duran. I don't know, at the time he was in high school, and we're both dying, of course, and Ramadan is not in our consciousness. And at one point, he and I are looking at each other, and we want to, reach, get a bottle of water or something. And I thought, wait a minute, it's Ramadan. Let me ask the kids. I wonder if they're fasting, and they're probably not. I mean, these are young kids, right? So I sat everybody down. I said, I know it's Ramadan. By the way, is anybody here fasting? And to the last one, they all raised their hands. Every single kid there was fasting. And it had to be like 40 degrees and 98% humidity in that training hall. So I look at my son, and he looked at me with this look of despair, like, oh boy, we're screwed. I mean, there's no way, we're not going to pick up a bottle of water and drink it for these kids. It's not going to happen. But yeah, Palestinian kids are sweet, energetic, feisty. That's been my experience. Very feisty. You look if you're sitting around the old city of Jerusalem, and that's another little anecdote. You walk around the city of Jerusalem, you see every Jewish kid walking there has to have 2 armed guards. and nobody's going to hurt them, right? This is just the hype of the settler mentality, and to show who's in charge. Palestinian kids running around, coming, going, soldiers, big Israeli soldiers with big guns everywhere. They get arrested, they get beat up, they get searched. They don't care. They're running around. It's their home. It's their neighborhood. This is where they live. So yeah, my impression of Palestinian kids is that they do grow up very, very fast. There's no question about that. They get arrested. Their parents get arrested. Their brothers and sisters get arrested. But they don't lose that. But they don't lose their charm. They don't lose their spirit. They don't. They're feisty and they're strong, and they're wonderful kids. It's too bad that they have to go through this, but it's true. They do grow up very, very fast.
Yeah. Bob's got a question here. He notes that the films are magnificent in being clear and brief and at the same time very impactful. But it reminds him of similarities between the Palestinian evictions and those of the Mizrahi Jewish community in Tel Aviv. And, are we really talking about greedy intentions of developers or greedy settlers or the proactive complicity of the government in this whole thing? It just kind of, brings to mind that, these two situations are similar, and yet it's in the second case, a Jewish community.
Well, it seems like there's two questions here. One about the Mizrahi Jews and one about what we're seeing here. What we're seeing here is not just greedy developers and greedy settlers. We're seeing this is part of a systemic effort, which has been defined as the ethnic cleansing of Palestine. What happened? This is, like I said, it's been going on for the better part of the last 100 years. The de-Arabizing and Judaizing of Palestine has been a process that the Zionist movement has been engaged in for the better part of the last 100 years. And there's no difference between, like I said, what they did, 100 years ago, 70 years ago, 50 years ago, and what they're doing today. It's part of the same effort. Now, what we see, we're looking at Sheikh Jarrah. We look at Sheikh Jarrah, we see these religious settlers. And they're now really, they are the forefront. They are the knife's edge, if you will, the cutting edge of the Zionist expansion. But when we look earlier, let's say my parents' generation, we're not religious, quite the opposite. They were anti-religious in every way, shape, or form, but they were completely dedicated to Zionism. Zionism was their religion. It was always young zealots that were at the forefront. They were the ones who were actually pushing out the Palestinians and building and pushing and building and pushing and building, sometimes even if it meant being at odds with the authorities. And then the authorities came in and said, well, now we're here, what are we gonna do? We have to provide them with water and roads and security. And we see that all over the West Bank. We see that in Iran, Hebron, we see that everywhere. And of course we see it in the rest of the country. We have seen, that's been the system, that's how they do it. So what we see here is nothing different. We see a plan, it's called the Greater Jerusalem Basin. And we see a plan to build settlements, Jewish settlements in and around Jerusalem, and particularly East Jerusalem and some of the neighborhoods there. And I don't think it's any secret that the movement of the what they call the Temple Mount loyalists, which 30, 40 years ago made up of a few, maybe a few dozen loonies, today has a following of hundreds of thousands of non-religious Israelis. And their goal is to really create a larger Jerusalem. And this is all, documented. They talk about this freely. They had, in the previous Israeli government, they had three cabinet posts, and very important ones too. And their goal is to really create a greater Jerusalem that starts in Ramallah and goes all the way to Bethlehem. Some of you who know the geography. And certainly all these neighborhoods in Jerusalem have to be cleansed so that we can build settlements for Jews. And when the question is posed, and I know I'm going a little bit beyond the question here, perhaps, but when the question is posed to these people, what are you going to do with all these millions of Palestinians? They don't say Palestinians, they just call them Arabs. They say, well, they're going to have three choices. And again, this is being said in the Knesset, it's being said around the cabinet, the government table. This is not anything that's even hidden. They have a choice to, which is a preferred choice, to leave peacefully and find their place somewhere else and maybe get some compensation. They can remain as residents without rights, or they can fight and die. That's the option. And this has really been the option for Palestinians, you know, from the very beginning. These guys are not inventing anything. Only now that they're closer and they've got more power, their sights are on the Temple Mount, the destruction of Al-Aqsa. You know, they already have all these diagrams. Even the American ambassador to Tel Aviv, you know, was seen speaking with this design of the new temple that was going to be built instead of the Dome of the Rock. So this is not some crazy greedy settlers or developers, although they are greedy and developers are making money because they're getting the land for free and settlers are getting what they want. But this is part of the larger Zionist plan. There's no question. There's really no question about that in my mind. In terms of Mizrahi Jews, you know, when the Arab Jew, again, I don't think it's a secret, Zionism did not, the original Zionists did not intend for the Arab Jews to come. They wanted a place for European Jews where they would have their own European colony in Palestine, which is kind of Orientalist and romantic. And you know, in my family, my grandfather, the maternal side, my grandfather was kind of a romantic and a very active Zionist, and he was kind of the initiator. My grandmother came and complained about the heat and the flies and the Arabs, but she had to come because her husband was there, and you know, that's she was following her husband, even though she was, you know, a doctor and so forth. But that was that really was what it was about. But then the Jews didn't come. They even had the Holocaust, and even after the Holocaust, the Jews didn't come. You know, the vast majority of Holocaust survivors chose to stay in Europe, excuse me, or come to America, or places where they felt there would be, they could live where, you know, in tolerant environments. Palestine certainly didn't, you know, Zionism certainly didn't promise a tolerant environment. So they said, well, we're going to have to start bringing the Arab Jews. Of course, you can't say Arab Jews, you have to call them Mizrahi. Mizrahi means Oriental. I don't know, but all of North Africa is west of Palestine, but they're still called Oriental when they come from Morocco and Algeria and Egypt. Yemen is south, but it's still Oriental because everything here is, of course, Eurocentric. So they brought them, and it wasn't easy because many of these communities didn't want to come and were quite happy. So anyway, that was a whole other story of how the Arab Jews ended up coming to Palestine. And when they did come, of course, they were treated very, very poorly.
Yeah. Steve Buck had some comments to make.
Sure.
Thanks. It's good to be here. Yeah, I'm on the board of Unitarian Universalists for Justice in the Middle East. I served in 8 Arab countries over 39 years. I really like, especially, you know, what you said at the end. It's the films are very gripping, but in today's situation, I think it's really important that some of the things that you said, Milo, are said at the beginning or right at the end to give the bigger picture. I mean, to me, the big picture is, look, we have a systematic thing going on to completely dispossess the Palestinians in, well, we'd say Israel anyway. I think that's, you've got to get that big picture, otherwise they're going to get lost in the very emotionally gripping film, but they don't have the big context. And when I tried to look at it, I couldn't find whatever the article was. It was supposed to be in Haaretz that gave some background. So I had a question, for instance. It says that, you know, all these demonstrations, but it looked like most of that footage was done in 2010, 2011. And it keeps saying the same thing, that it's growing and growing. Well, is it growing and growing?
Yeah.
I don't think it's, you tell me, but I think with all that you've talked about and with Netanyahu, the left in Israel is dying. And so the idea that, leaving the impression that all these demonstrators are going to make a big change in Israel, I fear that that may not be the case. But so I guess what I'm getting at is to get to that big picture and that systemic problem. The other thing is I'm practical. I was in the Congressional Relations Division of the State Department for a couple of years, and I'd go up on the Hill. And AIPAC owned the Hill. And so when you talk, which may be true, that there can't be Israel and Palestine, there's only one, choose one, you chose Palestine. That's very honest, but God is going to get you absolutely nowhere in the United States. And to me, I wrote my thesis for a young professor named Kissinger back in 1963, and I concluded from them, nothing would happen unless the opinion of Jews in the United States changed. And so to me, that's the real bottom line, is getting American Jews, and we see that with J Street, but that's what's really important. And if you present it as an existential choice between Palestine and Israel, you will completely turn off those liberal Jews that you desperately need. And they, especially the young ones, they're into human rights. But if you start saying you got to choose Israel or Palestine, you've got a total disaster. Anything you say which threatens the existence of Israel, immediately the door is slammed shut.
Okay, Steve, I think let's let Miko respond to that. And,
Yeah, well, I think the door is shut anyway, Steve. It's not like the door's open for this conversation anyway. If we look at Bernie Sanders, for example, there's two ways of looking at the Bernie Sanders phenomenon, I think. One is to say, this is the first time in the history of the United States that anybody who dared to question and criticize Israel came so close to becoming president. He was a serious candidate twice. He was a very serious candidate twice. And he said, he criticized Israel about killing thousands in Gaza, and he said that we must condition aid to Israel with Israel compliance with international law in regards to the Palestinians. Nobody's ever said anything like that and made it even remotely as close as he did. The other way to look at it, which is and I to be honest, I look at it both ways because I think that there's not right or wrong here. The other way is, if you're going to get slammed for being anti-Semitic because you oppose Israel and reject Israel, go all the way. Why shoot and miss? It seems to me that, J Street and a lot of these kind of liberal-leaning Jews and liberal-leaning kind of, Americans basically too on this issue, non-Jews, they shoot to miss. You're going to get killed and called an anti-Semitic anyway. All of us here that are part of this, organizing, whatever, we're all they have a new term for guys like me. It's called auto-anti-Semitic. I don't know what that's supposed to mean, but that's kind of the term that they use. So that ship has sailed. We're already there. Might as well shoot to hit the target and not shoot to miss. And we brought about, you talked about the left in Israel. There is no left in Israel because the left in Israel always came down on Zionism. And you can't be left and Zionism. You can't be pro-peace and Zionist. It's impossible. You can't be socialist and Zionist. Zionism is a racist, violent, settler colonial ideology. There's no left there. You can't possibly be liberal, socialist, or left-leaning because all your values are, quasi-fascist values. That's what it is. People asked me once, I was speaking to some students, and they said to me, what was it like growing up? The father's a general and all this, Zionist upbringing. It's, the state is everything. It's like growing up in a fascist environment. So that's why there's no left. And it's funny because in one of the scenes there, in one of the protests, and by the way, you're right, the protest disappeared. After a while there, they disappeared. I was there recently and people are going back there again. So whenever there's they're expelling somebody, there's actually something happening, then a few people go to protest. But in one of the scenes there, they were chanting from Bilain to Sheikh Jarrah. Bilain is a Palestinian town in the West Bank where there's been a lot of marches and the popular resistance. Really, it's one of the places where the popular resistance and the marches began. So people would go to Bilain, do their protest there, hop on a bus, and come to Sheikh Jarrah because these are the same people. So we'd be standing there in Sheikh Jarrah. I never went to both. To me, it was too much. But if I was in Sheikh Jarrah that Friday, we'd wait for the buses to come from Bilain. So there'd be like 10, 15, 20 of us. And then a bus would come with another 20 or 30 from Bilain. But how long can you sustain that? That wasn't sustained for very long. but it's the same people going from, sometimes people would go on a Friday from one village to the other to participate in the protest because it's such a small group of people. So the left, any left that's of any significance among Israelis would be an anti-Zionist left. And there's not a lot of those. And again, they don't want the conversation over there. They don't want the conversation over here. Like you said, Congress, the doors of Congress are already closed to this conversation anyway, so we're gonna have to find a way to barge in to open the door ourselves. And I think there are ways to do it. We just need to regroup. But going back to this point of the existential issue, Israel or Palestine, if we don't talk about it in these terms, then it's like we're shooting to miss. We're already called anti-Semitic anyway. They already say that we want to kill all the Jews, which is of course nonsense anyway. Half of us, including myself, are labeled as Holocaust deniers for reasons beyond understanding. None of that matters. The point is, if we're going to have this conversation, let's shoot and hit the target. And the target is to free Palestine. The target is to recognize that Palestine was a country, was a place, was a society, was a heritage, has a history. You know, there's a people there, there were cities there was an existence there that was wiped out. Not to mention, of course, the monuments that have been destroyed and so forth. And again, Sheikh Jarrah in a way is a microcosm because there's so many monuments, so many important landmarks in that one small or relatively small Jerusalemite neighborhood. So I say let's tell it like it is, and if they don't like it, they don't need to like it. They're going to have to figure this out because eventually, you know, even Nelson Mandela they had to stop calling a terrorist, right? There's no choice in that because the truth in the end prevails, and I think it will prevail. And we just need to be consistent.
Just a comment and a useful piece of information. The comment is, I would disagree with the idea that you can give up on being called an anti-Semite. There's a huge difference between somebody, these Trump followers who are anti-Semitic, they are against Jews, and people who say, we're not against Jews, we are against violation of human rights. Those are two separate subjects. And then the final optimistic thing, my son-in-law, who's 100% Jewish, partnered with a Palestinian, and they've set up an organization called Skate Kilya, S-K-A-T-E-Q-I-L-Y-A. And they do skateboarding for, 15 teenagers, but then the teenagers are not only boys, but also girls, muhajibe. And it's a wonderful, just go to skatekilya.org, and they say, this gives us hope. And to me, we need that desperately right now. So
it's a great initiative. I saw something about it actually. I know of it. It's really a beautiful, wonderful thing. I'll just say, I'll just respond real quick because I'm sure there are a lot of questions here. But the conflating of Zionism and Judaism and the conflating of anti-Semitism with anti-Zionism is one of their tools. They've weaponized anti-Semitism, whereas we know very well that anti-Semitism, you have to be a racist. Anti-Zionism, you have to be anti-racist. Anti-Zionism is you're fighting racism. So again, that's part of these things that the conversation we need to be having.
Okay, Nick, Marty have a question, and after that, Skip, you're going to be up next. Okay, so Marty.
Well, it seems we have a racist government in Israel, just as the United States is giving money to Saudi Arabia to kill civilians in Yemen. My question is, since we have ethnic cleansing, perhaps genocide, what is the role of the United Nations? What have they done? What have they tried to do? Is there not a place for ethnic cleansing and genocide? Should there not be a world movement and a United Nations involvement here?
Well, the United Nations have been involved from the very beginning, but they're not effective. The United Nations can pass any resolution they possibly want, but they have no teeth. Nobody can force Israel to stop violating international law. Nobody can, right now you have to have there has to be the political will and the political strength to stand up to Israel and to force it. Really, if you think about it, I want to see the Sixth Fleet in Gaza imposing a no-fly zone, and providing humanitarian care to the 2 million people in Gaza that Israel has put in a concentration camp. That's really what we want to see. You know, the Sixth Fleet is right there in the Mediterranean. That's what it should be doing right now, imposing a no-fly zone and sanctions against Israel, and not a single gun, not a single bullet should be allowed to land in Tel Aviv. That's really what it should be about. But we need to get to a point where there's an American government that does that. We need to push for that, or we need to push for the United Nations to care about these things. So yes, while there are people who care within the United Nations, I'm sure they have no teeth. They've never had any teeth, and that's exactly a big part of the problem. You know, that's what the United
My
Nations
follow-up question is, how do we give them teeth? Do we need to change the Security Council? Why should one country be able to vote against 290 other countries?
Well, that has to do with the political setup that was put together after World War II. You know, the perpetuators of some terrible crimes got together and made sure that they were safe, they were secure, and these are the 5 permanent members, and that's it. And they call the shots, and that's just the way it is. That's the way the system was built. I think we need to look outside. I mean, I don't wait for the United Nations or for the U.S. or the Western governments to do this. I think it's up to us, each and every one of us, to broaden the coalition, to create alliances, to educate, to organize. You know, things like this, only, you know, bigger, broader, more and more of them. You know, this is what it's about. It's all about grassroots organizing. And you guys have been doing this for a very long time. This is exactly how it's done. We just need to do more of it and broaden it.
Right, Skip Shield.
My question is about Palestinian participation in the resistance to oppression of the people of Sheikh Jarrah. I've been to Sheikh Jarrah several times. I'm aware of people like Mohammed Sabah and Nabil Al-Kurd, who are very active. But my impression is most of the demonstrations that I've been to are largely either led by or more fully participated in by Israeli Jews. So where is the Palestinian resistance in Sheikh Jarrah?
I think that's true in many places. Sheikh Jarrah is not unique. You know, when I go to Sheikh Jarrah, I spend the afternoon there, march, and I go home, and I'm not really bothered by anyone. Same thing if I go to Wein or to Nabi Saleh or any of these, you know, other places where you have a protest, whether it's a weekly one or whether it's a, you know, one that is on a particular day or a particular reason. But that's not the case with Palestinians, because the Israeli secret police will come at 2 o'clock in the morning, either the night before or the night after, and take their kids and haul them to, you know, to the Maskubia, you know, the Russian compound, to the dungeons there, and start beating them and questioning them and torturing them and so forth. So it's a completely different reality. In many cases, if the Palestinians are employed by Israel, you know, and in Jerusalem that happens, or sometimes even if they're employed by the Palestinian Authority, this is if they get into any kind of trouble, that presents a problem for them in terms of employment. So there's no symmetry here. You know, the privilege that I or even you have when we're there, I probably even have a little bit more because they can't deport me. I'm an Israeli. So Israelis have, you know, at the end of the day, even if we get arrested, and I've been arrested, not there, in other places, you know, typically the worst thing that'll happen is I'll spend the night in jail. Next day I go home, there's a lawyer, everybody takes, you know, there's nothing's going to happen to me. That's not the case with Palestinians. The price Palestinians pay is far greater. And being privileged, my hope would be that more privileged Israelis like myself would make use of their privilege and show up so that it's overwhelming. So the numbers are overwhelming, you know. And that's not only for Sheikh Jarrah, although Sheikh Jarrah is rather easy because it's Jerusalem afternoon, you know, it's an easy gig. But it's a completely different reality for Palestinians than it is for Israelis. If a sniper is going to shoot at protesters, I promise you he will not shoot at someone who looks like me. He will not shoot at anyone who looks Israeli or Jewish, and they can tell, they know. You know, they're going to shoot at Palestinians. And you come to a point where you say, well, how many kids need to be limping How many kids need to be in the hospital? How many children need to be shot and killed before we get tired? So it's not it's not that the Palestinians don't participate because they don't want to. They participate because where they don't participate is because the price that they pay is really sometimes just so horrifyingly high that they can't do it.
Are you able to go back at your will at this time, or do you get harassed on the way in as well?
No, I go in and out as I please. No problem whatsoever.
Gene has asked if you have any reaction to Gordon Levy's recent publication on annexation that was in Haaretz.
I didn't see it. I saw that he wrote something, but I haven't seen it, no.
My interpretation, and maybe the Woods would jump in on this too, but my interpretation was that he was basically saying, hey, let's let it all happen.
Well, the whole annexation thing is in a way is a big farce. It's a storm in a teacup. Israel has annexed all of Palestine in reality. All of Palestine is controlled by Israel. All of Palestine, people talk about as though there's an argument, one state, two state. All of Palestine is one state. It's Israel. That's why I said we have to pick, which part, what aspect of that country we want to recognize and legitimize. All of Palestine has been a single state. It's Israel for decades and decades. It's not something new. And so if they want to officially annex it, okay, so they officially annex it. They've annexed all of Palestine. Where people are, up in arms, how come the Europeans are not saying anything? How come the Americans are not saying anything? Well, the Europeans and the Americans didn't say anything in 1948 when close to 1 million people were thrown out, where massacre after massacre after massacre after massacre were taking place in Palestine. Nobody says anything in Palestine ever. So they're going to talk about this one small little area within Palestine that Israel already controls anyway, that is building settlements anyway, because they decided to officially annex or not officially annex. I mean, it's a joke, really. I mean, it's really a joke. If we're going to talk about Palestine, if we're serious about, we either accept this reality, which is Israel, which has been for a very long time, the entire country, or we reject it. There's no, this settler colonialism mentality, the brutality, the violence. It's not like you can put a boundary to it and say, you know what? You're going to stop here, and from here to here, we're all going to be nice. It doesn't work that way. For them, all of Palestine is the land of Israel. It belongs to the Jewish people. End of story. The Arabs are invaders. Listen to what they say. Arabs are invaders because they came from Arabia, because they're Arabs, and that's it. They never stop to think that, if your name is Smotrich, like this Bezalel Smotrich guy, Smotrich is a town in Ukraine. What does he got to do in Palestine? No, but he's Jewish. You know what I mean? So I think, again, going back to the larger picture, we have answers for all of these questions, all of these issues. It's not about this little area or that little area. Eventually, it's all about internal Israeli politics, whether they annex or don't annex. A little deal between Netanyahu and Pompeo, whether to annex this little bit or wait till next week to annex it. I don't think that is the issue. Again, it's one small fire that we're all focusing on while they're dancing around all these other bigger fires that we're not paying attention to.
Okay. Angela, I think you get the last question. We're at about 3:15 here. There are a couple others that have come in. I don't know that we can squeeze them in, but Angela, if you would go ahead.
Yeah, thank you. And thank you, Amigo. Just wanted to follow up on a question that I assume other people have, which is you're essentially talking about a bi-ethnic state. That's the ultimate outcome of repatriation of Palestinians to their ancestral homes. Is that accurate? I mean, when you talk about the return, is that what it means? Is it a bi-ethnic
it's already
alongside of the Israelis living in one state?
It's already a binational state. The majority of the population that Israel governs is Palestinian already. It's already a binational state. Out of about 12 or so million people, the 7 million are Palestinians. Palestinians are already, but it's already a binational state. It's just right now in the current reality, it's an apartheid state. I have privileges the Palestinians don't. You know, if Jewish people want to go and immigrate and live there tomorrow, they have a right to become citizens immediately. 5 million refugees who can show you exactly, and I'm sure you know this, they can show you exactly where the village was, even though it doesn't exist anymore, and exactly where the mosque and the church and the school were, even though now it's Canada Forest or whatever it may be. They don't have a right to. They're banned from returning. So yes, definitely, I think it's already a binational state, and I think it's going to be a binational state. That's the reality in Palestine. There are two nations: Israelis like myself, which is really a new creation. We're like the white Africans, we're like the whites in South Africa. We're not organic, we're not from there, we're not native, we're the result of settler colonialism, but that's the reality now, like there's whites in South Africa. There's this new thing called Israelis and the indigenous Palestinians, and hopefully the refugees will be able to come, and soon, and arrangements will be made for them to receive the compensation and so forth that they deserve. And yes, there's going to be a much larger Palestinian community, and it is going to be a binational state. It's going to continue to be. It's already a binational state. Yes, definitely.
Right, Ethnic. How is that going to happen?
Well, like I said, it's already there. The question is how the reality is already there. It's one state, and there are two people living there, Israelis and Palestinians. Right now, there's a political. I'm sorry?
Sorry, Palestinians returning to their homeland. How is that effectively going to happen in political terms? Sort of.
Well, who knows? But if you were to ask me what I envision, then same as, when apartheid fell in South Africa, as a result of sanctions and pressure and isolation and so forth, and perhaps other forces, the president of South Africa stood up at a podium one day, not because he felt good, but because he was on his knees. South Africa was done. There was nowhere to go for the apartheid regime. And they called for one-person, one-vote elections and the release of all political prisoners. And then he released Nelson Mandela as well. And that was it. And, they offered Mandela in, I think, 85 or 86 to come out and compromise. And he said, thank you very much. I'm going back to Robben Island. We want full equality, one person, one vote. And they got it. So I think that's exactly how it's going to happen. There's going to be a prime minister. It may well be this one, because I don't think he's going to leave his seat ever for the foreseeable future anyway. And he's going to have to stand up and say, well, you know what? We've come to a point where there's no choice. One person, one vote. And once you have one person, one vote, then you have a legislature that represents all the people for the first time, that represents Palestinians as well. Then you have a government that represents all the people as well for the first time. That's never happened. And then the first thing on the agenda is the repatriation of the refugees. Without any doubt, the repatriation of the refugees and reparations for 70 years or almost 100 years of dispossession. These things have been done before. Israel has been getting reparations from Germany for a very long time. These things have happened before. We don't have to reinvent the wheel. We just have to apply it to Palestine.
Okay, Miko, you've got another event coming up at 5 o'clock today. Can you tell us a little bit about that? Maria's interested.
Yes, I can post the flyer if you want the information real quick here. It's an event organized by a Muslim Student Association, and I'll be speaking alongside two other fabulous women. One who lives here in America. Let me just real quick pull it up. And I'll post it for you. And we're going to be, we're going to be discussing basically what we've been discussing here, only it's probably going to be a little more interesting because you're not only going to be dealing with me, you're going to be hearing from these two other fabulous women. One is a professor in Tehran, and she'll be speaking from Iran. There he is. And the other one is Manar Mahawesh, who is the founder of Mint Press News, for which I write. It's a publication that I write for. And I will post this here in the chat so everybody can see the event right here. I'll post their Facebook page so you can see it. Yeah, I'd love to see everybody join. It's going to be very interesting. Like I said, you're going to get a much broader perspective. And we're going to be discussing, you know, my role is going to be discussing the apartheid, specifically the apartheid regime. But it's going to be much broader than just that.
So Diana's question is, what are the implications from what you've told us so far for our own activism? Do we bother to hold Congress accountable? Do we, you know, gear up on other activities? Do we try to keep awareness in front of everybody through these kinds of events, or just where do we go?
Well, you know, like I gave the example of Sanders earlier, of Bernie Sanders. Bernie Sanders would not have stood up in a major presidential debate as he did in the previous elections, while it was him and Hillary, and talk about Israeli crimes in Gaza. He would not have stood up this time and demanded that the U.S. condition its aid to Israel on Israeli compliance with international law, had it not been for events and people like you. The only reason he got that far and was able to say those things is because of this, and student organizations, SJP, and Muslim student organizations, and other groups on campuses. This is why he did that. He didn't wake up one morning feeling, you know, it's the right thing to do. This is his constituency now, and he knows that. So I would say not only continue, but expand the circle even more. Expand it even more. Share this video, this recording, you know, share it with everybody and tell people to watch the movie. You know, other things that are happening around the world. There's wonderful, you know, I get questions from people all the time saying, you know, somebody, you know, my Jewish neighbor or my son's Jewish girlfriend or whatever, whoever it may be, is saying that, you know, all this, there's no such thing as a Palestine. What do I tell them? You know, there's so much information out there. Our job is to educate. That's what we're out there to do. That's what this is for. So we all had this conversation now. We've answered a lot of questions. We've seen the movie. We've discussed a lot of things. Now we got to share this with as many people as possible. So this woman who has a neighbor or a son-in-law or a friend or somebody at work who asks these questions, you know what, look at this. Look at these movies, look at this conversation. If you don't want to watch the whole hour, watch 20 minutes of it, you know. We need to do more of what we're doing, and that's how we win, and that's how it works. Absolutely, do more. And I think, again, this is incredibly invaluable and important work. This is why Bernie Sanders was up there, and I'm sure that the next presidential cycle, you know, I doubt it will be Bernie himself, but whoever it's going to be, there will be a progressive candidate who's probably going to go even farther, because Bernie always has to preface his criticism of Israel with how much he loves Israel. And how when he was a teenager, he was not kibbutz, which is not something to be proud of, but never mind. That's kind of the way he says it. Hopefully the next one will say, you know, I reject Zionism and here's why. And here are all the people behind me, people like yourselves and myself and hopefully others who are going to support him and be his constituents.
Great. I didn't want to direct this final question specifically to you because I don't know if you've done any research, but is anybody aware of what's happened to Muhammad and the other three people, Terry and the group in the 4 films? Anybody have any information on that?
I don't know that there's anything new going on since then. Yeah.
Okay. Hopefully we can all you know, keep our boots on here and keep working to move ahead and to expand awareness, just as Miko has commended us to do. So
Somebody had their hand up.
Dana might know something.
who?
Somebody had their hand up a minute ago.
Yeah, Dana has her hand up.
Okay, I can't see them all, so. Oh, Dana, okay, go ahead. Oh, I can't hear you.
She's muted.
Unmute yourself,
There,
Dana.
there, I've unmuted her at this end. Can you try again? Oh, Muhammad is in college in the US. Thank you for that. And then as Miko said, the number of people actually protesting has declined perhaps some, but we hope that there's still some verve in action over there. So thank you again. Being locked down by the coronavirus has changed all of our lives at the moment, but I just want to have everybody continue to remember what's going on. Continue demolitions of houses, people being displaced, checkpoints more stringent, less predictable, settlers destroying farms, dumping sewage, throwing trash and feces and everything else, and still arresting and detaining children. It's going on and on. So our mission is more important than ever as American citizens dealing with the consequences. Despite dealing with the consequences of the virus, we have lots to do. We're all locked down right now. Nobody's having meetings, but if you can spread the word on the films, spread the word on Just Vision's other films, which they have a number on there. The Museum of the Palestinian People has an online exhibit available. There are many other things like that. I hope that most of you in the DC area here are on our list of upcoming events, which Lisa Sams and I produce weekly, usually on a Tuesday. And if you are not on that list and would like to be, please send me an email at tojo@att.net, and we'll get you on that list so you can be aware of what are mostly virtual meetings going around the area right now. But throughout the year, we've been doing this for 3 solid years now, lots of events going on around the city. It's tojo@att.net. We plan to continue these kinds of events, a monthly online series. We really feel the urgency of continuing to spread the word here. So we're trying to line up a series like this that can be produced on a monthly basis and expand to a larger group. I'm learning here. It's a lot of people to manage here, but I think we've all been very mindful of other people's times to talk to, and I appreciate that very much. If we go to a broader group of events, we probably will not have quite as much opportunity for Q&A, but I hope we do. We will be putting out information on future films. I think we have figured out how to actually screen a film, and we're going to try and keep that to a 20 or 30-minute film, followed by a discussion similar to what we've been doing physically in the past at the various churches and partners around the area, and in Richmond, St. Louis, and Boston. So we're trying to put together a little subcommittee here to continue this planning effort. We'll probably reach out to some of you. If some of you particularly want to be involved, or particularly have a subject or a moderator or a film that you would encourage us to do. We're trying to keep up with new films. We're trying to get information out there that's fresh, but we can't always manage all of it either. So your assistance and volunteering is essential. And lastly, and most importantly, thank you, Miko, for guiding us on this discussion today and bringing your insight and perspective to the topic. When Deepak first approached him to be on the session today, he said, "Hey, anything you guys need, I'm there for." So thank you.
Absolutely. Thank you.